So I've been playing quite a bit of Overwatch competitive recently, and I've noticed a trend. There are barely any tank players in my games. I'm lucky if I get one, sometimes I get two, but for the most part it seems like it's up to me to fill his tank if we want a good team comp, and me trying to main support this season, as you know, Moira, Mercy, Anna, all these other characters, it's not exactly what I want to do, but I've kind of started to do it a little bit, and whatever. But today I want to talk about why it seems like nobody plays tanks, why people haven't played tanks for a long time, and specifically why right now I guess people are kind of figuring out why you shouldn't play a tank and why people are not doing this role. Now, with that in mind, I do hope that there are more tank players that are going to come eventually. I hope that something changes because I think it is one of the most important roles in the game if played correctly. But there are a lot of problems for them, and I completely see why a lot of tank players would be switching off that role. Anyways, let me get on to the first reason, and that is that when you're playing a tank, there's almost no promise that if you outplay the enemy tank, you'll win that match. And I think this is easily comparable to playing a DPS. If you're McCree and you are much better than the enemy McCree, there's a pretty good promise that if you completely outplay him, you can outplay the rest of his team and win that match. And of course, with support, it kind of works as well. If you get much better nanos, if you get much better, a really good example is reses as Mercy, and make sure that you aren't dying versus the while using the res, that gives you really good promise of winning that match. But when you're playing tank, for the most part, you can't outplay way too much. While you can outposition, and when you can outshot call, a lot of the times, maybe if you outplay, you can get one kill, unless you have your ultimate, then you can do pretty well at times. But for the most part, with your regular kit, you can maybe get one kill, maybe on the enemy tank. But if you get that, it doesn't guarantee that you're going to win that match. And a lot of the times, you just kind of have to hope that your DPS will follow up and, take that point for you. And if they don't, you're just kind of screwed, especially if you're playing someone like Reinhardt that can just get kited super easily. I think that's a thing that just has really started to just daunt on a lot of tank players and make a lot of them not want to play this role anymore because it's super hard to carry as this role. Now, I feel like overall and long term, you can carry games as tank and you can climb as tank, and especially because there's so little tank players, it actually isn't way too hard, but from a game-to-game basis, it really feels like you can't do way too much compared to a lot of the other roles, which I think does hurt this role as far as the popularity. Now, secondly, I think a thing that, at least that I've been noticing, or at least applies to me, I feel like the tank role doesn't really appeal to way too many people. The problem about tanks, at least in my opinion, is that a lot of the times they tank okay, they damage okay, and they have a little bit of CC. So they do kind of a little bit of everything, but they don't really fit that key niche that a lot of people would want. For example, maybe I'd want to play a tank that's kind of similar to Reinhardt, but instead of doing a decent amount of damage like he does almost no damage and has a lot more crowd control. I feel like a lot of people would probably go towards that character, or maybe go towards a character like D.Va that maybe even does a little bit more damage and, kind of goes like that. I guess D.Va's a kind of odd example because a lot of people like her, but that kind of goes with a lot of the characters in the tank role. They do pretty good damage, they tank pretty well, and they don't have way too much CC. And I feel like just the way that they've been designed, I don't really know who it's supposed to appeal to, because if you want to deal a lot of damage, you'll probably just play tank and then eventually switch out to DPS. And if you want to have some CC, well, you can't really pick way too many people, but, I guess you can play some supports. And, of course, being able to tank, I feel like a lot of people wish they could do it a little bit longer and, get rid of some of the other stuff in their kit to maybe do that. I don't know, maybe that's just me, but I feel like oftentimes the role and the characters in the role don't really appeal to way too many people. And in general, just in most games, people don't like playing tank way too much because, it's just not the most appealing role in the first place, getting punched in the face over and over again. I think we can agree on that. My third point to why this is going on is that usually at any time, if you're trying to become a tank player, there are only 2 to 3 good tanks at a time. And when you compare that to supports, it does kind of stay similar, but for the most part, you can at least play 4 supports and, some of the off supports like Sombra, Torb, Symmetra. And with DPS, there's a ton of characters. There's usually around 8 or 9 that are good at a time. And I think this makes a big problem for tanks that makes people not want to play the role. If there's only a very small select amount of characters that you can play, and a very small select amount of characters that the enemy team is going to play, because, if they're playing meta and if they're really trying to win and everything like that, they're probably going to play them, that makes, for the most part, you're playing the same character, or, on and off, 2 different characters every single game, versus the same character, or on and off, 2 different characters every single game. I think you could realize, just from the numbers itself, that could get kind of boring. When you compare that to like the 16, 18 DPS characters, all the different variety that comes from there, and then you compare it to what it is right here, I think that can just kind of point out to why tanks get kind of bored of the role, especially because most tanks kits are very uninteractive compared to most other characters, and even though they are so important, there's just not nearly as much outplay potential in most of the tanks kits. Not all of them, but most of them. Something else that I'm also going to mention, I guess my fourth point, is that oftentimes teams can actually get away without playing one of their tanks. And I think that's one really big portion of why so many people actually aren't playing tank. A lot of the times you can go into a game and win it with only one tank and with 3 DPS. And, you know, that kind of makes sense. That's okay. The meta changes and everything. Even in 2 tank metas, people often do this. But if that's the case, if you can go with one tank and then all these other interactive characters that have generally more stuff they can do with their kit, that have more outplay potential, that can oftentimes get just more promising victories if you get good at them, why would a lot of players keep playing a tank when they have the possibility to play a DPS character that could carry them out of that game? I think that's what a lot of people are thinking. Now, this logic might be a little bit out of the blue because, you know, sometimes playing tank will be easier for you to carry with because just a better team comp can win you games in itself. But as far as, you know, to the game-to-game, action-to-action, in your mind, I think most people realize, or at least think to themselves, that, you know, if I'm playing DPS, I can probably carry more, so let's just go triple DPS. And I think a lot of tank players just kind of figured, you know, I can probably do this. And then, of course, they played half tank, half DPS, and slowly started to move more towards DPS. Now, I know quite a few tank players also do move towards support, but I think DPS is often what they'll do the most because of this fact, because you can get away with playing one tank. And because in a lot of situations and a lot of metas, especially in higher elo, one tank is actually what you're supposed to do. I think that does kind of create a problem, though, because oftentimes you'll get into games where nobody is playing tank because if there only has to be 1 out of 6 players that plays tanks, what's the chance that you'll get that 1 out of 6 player every single game? And then everyone else is going to have to fill. It just kind of goes downhill from there. And yeah, I think that's where the problem from having only one tank can come from. And that's why so many people are turning off of tank, because they have the opportunity to not play the role. I know a lot of people do like the role of tank, and personally I do like it quite a bit also, but one, there's just more tantalizing of a role that you could maybe go for, that everybody says is, for the most part, easier to carry with, that everybody says the best players play. You know, most people are probably going to listen to that and try to go for that, even though it might always not be 100% the truth. Now, the final reason to why I think that a lot of people aren't playing tank, and why really it feels like nobody plays tank right now, is that, simply put, there's just not really any gratification for playing tank and for tanking for your team. I mean, when you're playing Reinhardt and you're holding up that shield, it's not like you're getting kills. It's not like you're getting some dings and damage. It's not like you're getting headshots. While you are protecting your team, and while you are doing your job, and while you are being a very good player, and even if you're making great shot calls and everything, there's just no gratification in the game for that. And there's not really a super good way to even make gratification in the game for that, because if you add, like we had before, a gold medal for blocking damage, I mean, if you block just any damage and you're the only tank, it doesn't really feel way too good because you didn't block way too much. I feel like something that they maybe could do is make so that if the enemy was about to get a kill and you protected a teammate, maybe it showed up at the top part of the screen, but even that, I'm really kind of unsure. Just for playing tank in general, it feels like there is no big credit for what you've done. Unless you get a super nice ultimate with Zarya, with Reinhardt, or with maybe D.Va if you get like a super big pop-off ult, I don't feel like there's much that people are going to say, hey, Reinhardt, really good job. Hey, Orisa, really good job. Especially with characters like Orisa, where their kit is just very fluid and just does consistent damage, and where it really isn't that impressive to look at. I think that can just make players get kind of bored of the role. If you compare, you know, very little gratification on playing tank to playing like Genji, getting a triple kill, and having your team be like, hey, that guy did amazing, of course, you're probably going to feel a little bit better on the Genji. Now, even if the Zarya on your team put a bubble that saved the Genji's life, that allowed him to get that triple kill, that doesn't really matter for the Zarya. Nobody's really going to care about the Zarya that did that, and she's not really really going to get any credit in the long run. And I think that's just kind of where the problem comes. And again, I don't really know way too much about how to fix this problem. It's just something that's kind of shown up. And I feel like if you are a tank player, you just kind of have to take the SR that you're going to gain from playing a role that's really needed as your gratification instead of any stuff that your teammates say. Or maybe start shot calling a little bit more, because oftentimes people will thank you for shot calling. So that could kind of help you in that way anyways. Anyways, as always, guys, thank you all for watching. These are at least my own reasons to why I feel like really just about nobody plays tanks. But if you have your own reasons, please leave them down in the comment section down below. Of course, if you enjoyed the video, make sure to hit that subscribe button and leave a like if you want to see more like this in the future. Anyways, as always, guys, thank you all for watching and have a wonderful day.